Hello, my name is Drew Sukup. On behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, Ransomware Response Readiness with VMware-native DRaaS, presented by William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products. Thank you for participating in today's webcast and for your continued support in the global VMUG program. Before we begin, I have 3 quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webcast will be recorded and available for on-demand. You will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link, so keep an eye out for that. Second, the Q&A section will be monitored throughout today's presentation. All questions will need to be entered in the question window near the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. Third, there will be a short online evaluation that pops up as you exit the webcast. Please make sure to take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. All right, let's get started. William, I'll turn it over to you now.
Awesome, thanks, Drew. Hey, everybody. My name is William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products at phoenixNAP. And today I wanted to spend a little bit of time, do some education on, the threat that businesses are facing with ransomware. Talk a little bit more generically about business continuity and disaster recovery preparedness, and really kind of compare and contrast some of the options that are available to you guys today. For those of you, obviously you're at a VMUG presentation for VMware users of the world. There actually is quite a lot of different, options that are at your fingertips. And we think that VMware has built some really special ones that take advantage of VMware-powered cloud providers like phoenixNAP. So, we'll talk through some of those components. But I wanted to kind of set the stage with everybody and talk through the general problem. Like, why are you here? What do you see, on the market today? And even, the very recent kind of issues that even some of my competitors have faced. I think the most recent one that's coming to mind is the guys at Equinix had some internal systems hit pretty hard about 2 weeks ago. And, in that case, they had some significant protection of their data from a data protection perspective. But the reason we're going to talk about why ransomware and DR fit so well together is that a lot of times what we find is that businesses have poor disaster recovery capabilities, even if they have robust business continuity capabilities, right? And so, we'll kind of talk through those components and try to kind of piece apart why both a clean backup is super important and a copy of that data that's protected, but also why having the ability to enact disaster recovery failover can actually get your business back up and rolling quicker. This is just, a very, very small, very, very small subset of recent activities and some of the largest, compromises out there that are related to ransomware. But, for a lot of you guys, I'm sure on the call that have small universities, regional healthcare systems, city, local government, like this, you are the primary target for most of these guys that are out there looking to create maximum potential damage and try and assure themselves that their demands are going to be met. And I think the other one that we're starting to see a lot of, and we'll talk a little bit about as well, is this ransomware, conversation is evolving now into more than data availability extortion, more than just saying, hey, I'm going to delete your data, but also, starting to essentially leak the data that they've taken in an effort to, put you in a position that you are more willing to pay because you don't want the data that you have compromised and leaked to the internet. So it's become a very kind of hot topic, and by the number of people that are on the call today, I think that is definitely the case. And for those of you that are here, instead of doing a VMworld session right now, I thank you very much for taking the time and coming and listen. So I'll try to get everybody back to the regularly scheduled programming as quickly as possible. So, when we look at ransomware, some of the big statistics that come to mind every 11 seconds. There are a lot of businesses out there, and so that data point is definitely a little bit aggressive, but it's true, right? The problem that you have is that a lot of businesses have is that ransomware's main delivery capability is via the end user, right? So it's an email or a drive-by download that's compromising some type of endpoint, and then using that endpoint to basically work its way through your critical systems internally, right? And so it's very easy. It's hard to control your user population, and with COVID, it's even worse, right? Because everybody, many companies, went to work from home, leveraged some, non-mature BYOD concepts, gave everybody a VPN client and said, connect here, right, to get to our critical assets. And so what we're starting to see is even more risk to businesses because they're put into a situation where they've got untrusted endpoints connecting to at least sensitive data that they have in their corporate data center or in the cloud offering that they chose. And a lot of times, even those mid-grade sensitive data, systems ultimately end up having some type of access to potentially critical systems. And the ransomware of today that is often being guided, by it's automated for the most part until something is compromised, and then what we're seeing is attackers are kind of helping ransomware along through networks and through critical targets that have been hit, essentially. So, they're able to intelligently work their way through these environments from endpoint to less critical system to critical system. And I think that, there's a lot of things. We have other talks that we've had in the past via VMUG about ways to protect it from spreading, ransomware and other malware from spreading. And we spend a lot of time on network security and things like NSX and some of the major technologies that VMware has around that. But, kind of for the purposes of today, we're going to spend most of the time talking about how to get back up and running quickly and ensure that you have a very clean, known good copy of your data. And those two things are going to go hand in hand. So what does this look like, right? So we have, a massive population of systems that have been created. They're really hard to protect, and we are seeing huge spikes still in 2020 with ransomware. And it is encrypting people's critical data. It is starting to leak critical data, and attackers are essentially building websites for the central purpose of just putting people's critical data on the internet, small subsets of it, and saying, if you don't pay me, I'm going to release all of it, plain text, and tell everybody where they can come see all of the data that we've taken from you and that we've encrypted. So I think that that's one. And then the last one that is new, when I look at like the state of ransomware in 2020, is the rise of ransomware as a service, right? And so that's kind of the 2019, 2020, we're starting to see essentially dark web SaaS platforms that allow anyone and their mother to pay to target and infect other businesses. And maybe they can't get the exact business that they want, but they can, get themselves access to these capabilities really easily, and in a very much a point and click kind of model. And you can start building a small criminal enterprise that way. So it's not a very pleasant place on the internet from a business perspective today. I think the other one that's really tough for me on the slide is this last data point. Using backups to recover from ransomware. That's 44% of people that probably either didn't recover or paid the ransom, or, you know, none of these are recommended. pNAP's kind of stated direction for its customers is we don't recommend that people pay ransoms, right? We recommend that people get prepared ahead of time, and ultimately, you know, work with authorities and work with the, you know, whoever they feel can help them out of their situation the best. But ultimately, paying the ransom just leads to paying again one day, right? It's not likely that if you pay a ransom, I don't know what the statistic is on it, and I definitely wish I did right now, but you know, the amount of folks that don't get access to their data after they pay is probably very high. And so not only have you potentially lost your data for good, but now you're out cash as well. So it's a tough position for anybody to be in, but there are things that you can do. So we're going to talk about those. You know, when we look at you know, your first lines of protection, right, it really does come down to the endpoint and the employee. You know, you have to be in a position to secure the endpoints that are speaking to your critical systems, right? You have to put yourself in a position where you can gain a level of trust with the systems that are accessing your sensitive data in your critical environment systems. And you know, I think that some type of endpoint security layer is probably still the most effective way to go with that. Whether that's a Carbon Black or a Sophos or you know, some of the newer ones out there, Silence and the others that are kind of more, you know, in between kind of AI based and more signature based endpoint protection capabilities. Honestly, I think the number 2 is probably the most important, right? Training your employees on how to kind of stay away from clicking on things that are just bad for them, right? And ultimately, they're the weakest link. All of the people on this call and their employees are the weakest link. We make stupid decisions as humans sometimes, and we push the wrong button. And even myself, right, I've been known to, you know, probably accept something that I shouldn't have accepted, and or, you know, operate a system in a manner that you shouldn't operate it in order to get to your desired outcome. So I think that's it. I think that, you know, implementing strict east-west security in your environment will help not stop the ransomware from taking over a system, but help stop the spread of it inside your environment. I think that that's very important, and I think that that's, you know, very much so from critical system to critical system, but also from those VPN endpoints into your critical environments. And then the last one I think is a kind of a two-sided, right? It's not just having some type of disaster recovery capability. It truly is first having a good, known, clean backup of your data that is a tertiary copy, right? And is stored in a location that is offline or immutable in some way, right? And so what we recommend for our customers is placing a copy of their backups in object storage that has immutable capabilities that allow you to, you know, kind of policy-based write once and read many times of the data, and making that data essentially not modifiable after it's been written for a period of time. I think that's kind of perfect step 1. Step 2 is, or perfect solution number 1. Solution number 2 is some type of offline media. It's a little bit harder to accomplish. There are some kind of intricate ways of doing it where you start a backup job by putting something online first and then running your backup and then taking it offline. But that can be kind of a pain to manage. So really that offline immutable copy is or if it's online immutable copy is probably your best bet. And then kind of the situation that I was talking about, I want to talk a little bit more about, early, in a little bit, is making sure that not only you have that good known copy, but that copy is somewhere that you can do something with in a reasonable period of time, so that you're not down for large periods of time with your internal or external customers. So let's talk a little bit about disaster recovery as a service, right? Why should you even consider disaster recovery as a service? Well, I think that I think most people on this call are likely vSphere admins or VMware customers that have some type of technical function, right? And that you have to have automated copies of your data in multiple places. So 3-2-1 rule, whatever you want to kind of talk about. The next logical step of that is really replicating that somewhere else so that you can quickly access that data and fail it over to a secondary site, right? And failover can mean a lot of things, right? It can truly mean live replication with some type of replication cut and promotion and placement of that data online. And we help customers do that every single day. A lot of times it can mean just a second copy of the data and compute resources in another location to restore that to and bring it up online. I think that having all those capabilities are really important, and really trying to provide this flexible recovery option, because that's the one thing that a lot of people miss when they're thinking about disaster recovery. I will give you kind of an interesting analogy that I use when I talk to people about disaster recovery and why the way that we've been doing it for years is essentially pretty dumb. So, I myself have done this as the implementer of IT deployments from businesses around the globe. And, it looks something like this. Build your primary environment, build a second environment, replicate the infrastructure that you have in your primary environment to your secondary environment, and then replicate the data itself between those two environments. And I think the interesting thing about that's a little funny is that we as humans do all kinds of things all the time to build essentially insurance for bad things happening, right? Car insurance, health insurance, etc. And I would assume that most of you on the call don't have a second copy of your car sitting in your driveway waiting for your primary car to break so that you can get in your secondary car, right? And you could make a claim that, like, okay, maybe your partner's car or whatever is your kind of failover system, but even that's not particularly optimal. And even if you take it to the next step and kind of talk about healthcare as an analogy, you certainly aren't, staffing a doctor 24/7 in case you have an ailment, and then you can just have him be like right there, ready to go, right? That's why we have hospitals and hospital systems. So, in the face of that, yet we still feel compelled to build everything twice and replicate the data ourselves. And so this rise of disaster recovery as a service has been so violent because people just, cloud obviously has changed the consumption model of compute. Networks have gotten better. There are some reasons that this is a reality, of sorts now. The cost model has kind of become in line, but, now I would say you have to have some really, really compelling scale or need to build a secondary site and replicate your data to equipment that you own in a data center that you either lease or own yourself. And so, yeah, like that's kind of the thing, being able to take advantage of large pools of infrastructure that are sitting there and essentially sharing time or sharing the cost of the recovery site with other people can be very compelling from a business value perspective. And so let's just kind of walk through really quickly again exactly what you're getting in each, right? So on the DR side, you get quick restoration, you get replication of your environment, not just the data itself. And usually there's some type of runbook or failover automation that's going on there. It is the more expensive option. It is, does require you to invest in the technical solution much more, right? Like I said, getting that failover site operating like your primary site quickly can be a task for sure. But backup as a service and or offsite backup as a service does meet a lot of the same kind of capabilities that DR offers, but you have really long restoration timelines because restoring those backups, building everything from scratch again from a networking perspective, from a WAN connectivity perspective, whether that's VPN, MPLS, or internet circuit, can take a long time, right? And that's kind of the thought process that I was walking through earlier at the beginning of the call when I was talking about kind of what we observed with the latest outage from the guys at Equinix is that ultimately, everything came back up. Ultimately, it doesn't look like they had any significant data loss, but they had critical systems down for many, many hours and days, most likely because they were restoring everything from a backup, right? And maybe they have some super critical systems that are live replicated that, none of those that to my knowledge were hit, but it was pretty clear that they did not have any type of failover orchestration because their systems were down for a really, really long time. And if they did, it probably wasn't tested, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. But, that's the reason for disaster recovery. That's the reason for having this kind of pre-configured second site, replicated data that's in some type of native format that can be quickly put online. And there are ways to protect yourself from things like ransomware via replication, right? And there's delayed replication capabilities. There are ways to kind of live rehydrate kind of replicated snapshots or backups. There are many, many different kind of technologies that we can talk through, with you about that are ways to kind of use disaster recovery, backups, and protect yourself very, very well from the most intense threat I think that we faced in a long time, which I do believe is ransomware. So specific to the product and service that we offer at phoenixNAP, right? We're talking to customers every day about their VMware environment, and we're positioning solutions that are native to the VMware environments that you guys have today. And we're providing a target that is very similar to what you would build if you chose to build a secondary site. On not having to do digital transformation, hyperscaler adoption through disaster recovery, right? Which is another option for sure, right? There are solutions to replicate to Azure, to replicate to AWS from VMware. But ultimately, you're having to accomplish a pretty heavy lift, and the technologies in the destination are not similar to the technologies that you have on the source side. And that's where a lot of the value that our partnership with VMware provides our customers is this ability to, via vSphere, point, click, configure, and replicate to one of our disaster recovery locations around the globe and deploy that quickly and implement that quickly. And spend the time that you have on making sure that your automation is good, and making sure that your failover is solid, and making sure that you're testing your disaster recovery plan regularly versus, patching some DR site, and I still know plenty of customers in our data center business that do this, right? That spend hours and hours and hours a month, literally just maintaining an environment that they never intend to use, that they really truly hope never has to be, run their primary copy of their data. But they still spend a ton of time working on it, configuring it, upgrading it, refreshing it. I know so many businesses that have gone through multiple hardware refresh cycles. I never actually had an event that caused them to fail over, right? So new private cloud, new private cloud, new private cloud, every 3 years, every 4 years, never touched it. Even the ones that are testing, even the ones that are doing everything the way that they felt like they should, that were prepared for an issue, ultimately didn't get great value out of the approach that they took. So making it cost efficient, I think, is that really key part to why disaster recovery as a service, not just why pNAP and VMware, but why DR as a service in general, right? Is simple pricing structures. I think pretty much most of the major providers, ones that are kind of listed on Gartner like ourselves, have taken disaster recovery and implemented it in such a way that is easy to adopt and easy to understand from a costing perspective. How many VMs do you have? How many terabytes of storage do you need to consume in the target, right? And then there are some complexities if you have physical infrastructure, if you have NAS, if you have other things, there are some ways that those things have to be addressed, but ultimately a lot of your environment can be handled quickly. And so what does that look like on our side? You see kind of 3 major technologies in place, right? There's VMware Cloud Director, which is giving you the centralized management of this environment, both pre and post failover. It's the place that you go and configure all of your second site networking, WAN configuration, MPLS, VPN, etc. There's the VMware Cloud Director availability components, which is built into vSphere 7 and above. So if you're using vSphere 7, you probably have seen it. There's a Cloud DR, I think is what it's called, component in there in the vSphere UI. pNAP is listed right there, usually near the top. You can just, work with our teams, get a kind of a built idea of what your environment will look like, your failover needs look like, and then, a little virtual appliance, a username, a password, and you're off and replicating. And then the underlying technologies is vSphere Replication Manager and some other kind of proprietary stuff that's in there. But you get this ability to manage all that from your side in your vSphere UI, right where you're doing all your other operations, as well as on the destination portal, right, in the VMware Cloud Director UI. You can see all of your assets, you can see the replications, you can see how they're doing, you can trigger failover testing. There's so many different cool ways. So I kind of already walked through the next slide, but that's what it looks like. Pretty simple. Like I said, there are complexities. Larger businesses that are on the call, don't get me wrong, I'm not overselling the capability. If you've got thousands and thousands of virtual machines and tons of different types of infrastructure, and it definitely can be a task for sure. But for those of you on the call that have, sub 100 VMs and are fully virtualized, this is no-brainer easy. So I kind of urge you to check it out, whether with us or with anybody. There is a long list of providers that are there in the vSphere UI that you can kind of talk to as part of setting all this up. This is the kind of major components of our offerings today. For those of you that haven't heard me talk before, our relationship with VMware is a very, very, very lengthy one. We were one of the first 6 service providers in the VMware Cloud program in 2010 and early 2011. So we've been doing this a very, very, very long time. We are a principal partner, which is the highest qualification that you can get in the VMware Partner Program. And we have a ton of different solutions that cater to different needs for businesses. So there's a lot going on there from a VMware and phoenixNAP perspective. That's the That's the eyeball slide my marketing team put in there. But for those of you that are kind of wondering, you know, where are we at? Where can these services be consumed? You know, this is a snapshot of our deployment today. We're growing so fast, and we're building a lot of new capabilities that are allowing customers, specifically you guys that are in the VMware ecosystem, you have a very compatible environment to the environment that we're building in our data centers with the same OpEx cloud consumption, you know, pay as you consume models available that the hyperscalers offer. Like I said, without having to do massive transformation, you are able to actually lift, shift, hybridize, do data protection, do everything in a very concise and easy way. And we kind of spread those capabilities out around the globe so the customers everywhere have the ability to choose kind of where they would like to implement the services. And so let's see here. If you got questions, I'm going to kind of start wrapping up. So if you got questions, throw them into the chat and I will answer them. Anything technical, business, whatever, just throw it in. I'll handle them from there. I do think that this is kind of the major reasons that customers choose to work with us, right? You know, we are an infrastructure platform at the end of the day. This is not lock-in. This is not platform as a service, build your application around essentially my application and never get out, right? This is a place where you can consume infrastructure services in an OpEx fashion that match your business and the strategy that your business is trying to enact and enable, and maximize the investments that you've made for many, many years into your partnership with VMware and into the partners that you have today from an infrastructure provider perspective. You know, I would say that at least 60 to 70% of our customers don't just consume one service. They don't go all in pNAP. They have stuff in the hyperscalers. They have stuff in our infrastructure as a service products. They have stuff in our data centers. I probably, you know, I would say that of our cloud customers, probably 50% of them have at least some type of co-location in one of our data centers because they're still maximizing some capability that they have, whether that's a storage array that they just bought, a backup solution that they just bought, networking solutions that they are kind of unique for their environment that they want to use. They use those in tandem with infrastructure as a service cloud computing solutions to make the deployment that works for their business versus just throwing everything in the garbage and, you know, hoping it works out in the public cloud. All right, so, and this is nice. As of this year, we are listed as a representative vendor in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for disaster coverage and service. So, you know, that is something that we've been working on. It is kind of a very important recognition for us, and it truly means that customers at scale are choosing pNAP for specifically disaster coverage. So I'm going to jump in and take some questions. There's quite a few in here, so we'll try to get through them as quickly as we can. Somebody asked about data centers in Canada. Not right now. There are a lot of huge privacy lifts for us, even as you compare it to EU and things like GDPR. Canada, and specifically for the person that asked, the data that you are likely talking about in our experience that has to stay in Canada is likely, you know, some either healthcare or government related, and that target, while very important, is hard for us to kind of stretch and build the infrastructure platform that we built. It's important to kind of point out that we don't just go into a location and drop DR as a service and offer a cloud solution in DR, right? When we open a location, our goal is to put as many infrastructure products as we have can in that region, right? And that's because of what I said earlier, is that we're providing infrastructure choice, right? The ability to pick and choose and use the things that you want to use to best, maximize your benefit from your business perspective. And so just popping a cloud pod in and offering DR kind of violates some of that. And so that is the reason that we are not in Canada today. Certainly, if a large customer said, you need to be in Canada, we probably would be there. But it is not kind of what we're looking at from a strategic perspective. How do we charge for backups going to object storage, and are they immutable? Very cool, good question. As long as the backup technology that you have leverages S3, you can leverage pNAP object storage. The object storage pricing is less than S3 standard from an AWS pricing perspective. It is pay as you go. You can contract and get lower rates for different terms. And we do not charge anything for immutable service. So if you want to make those backups immutable, the objects in the bucket have to be configured for immutability and have a policy assigned to them. The reason we don't charge for them is because essentially we're getting committed resources when you do that, right? For the person to ask the question, if you put a 6-month policy on it, you can't delete it for 6 months, and you're paying for 6 months at that point. So that's kind of the reason that we don't charge for it as a special upcharge, because it is kind of guaranteeing consumption for us. Let's see here. Somebody asked, and I'll try to get this quick question. Major takeaways: have a mutable copy of your data, control phishing and ransomware at the end user and access level. Don't spend any unneeded money on creating a DR site when you can use, it says when you can use VMware-native DRaaS, any disaster recovery as a service, but yes, I do not spend money creating a DR site when there are a ton of solid solutions out there that you can consume disaster recovery as a service. And unless you have the strictest compliance concerns, and I'm not talking like PCI or HIPAA, like we have tons of those customers. I'm talking about very, very serious federal government, concerns. Then you can leverage disaster recovery that is on shared SAN infrastructure. And then we even have creative ways to ensure that when you actually provision and you go live, that you have reserve compute that is yours. Like I said, I wouldn't recommend it for most businesses because I don't feel it's necessary for most businesses, but we do have that capability. But even in that case, you're sharing a SAN with other people, right? Your data stores are separated logically, but that data is being stored in a cloud storage location that is shared with multiple people, and you are recognizing the benefits of that. Okay, someone asked about something about Veeam and the recycle bin used to keep a hidden copy of backups during a ransomware attack. Yeah, I would not recommend that. So the reason is, for the person that asked, what we're seeing, especially Veeam, right? And we are a huge Veeam shop. Don't get me wrong, I love them to death. If you've heard me before, you've likely heard me talking on a Veeam webinar, webcast of some type. But what I would say about that is, the attackers know that Veeam has, I think, just under 500,000 clients today. And they're getting very smart about the backup technologies that are being used. In fact, the ransomware guys are creating specific ransomware solutions to compromise backups based on the vendor that you're using. So they're running detection algorithms, they're determining what backup technology you use, and they're using that against you to try to compromise every capability you think you've leveraged. And that is actually why you see Veeam talking so much about data immutability, because they know that having a technology that is worm certified, and that is the capability that you're looking for. There is a specialized certification that has to be achieved to consider a data storage technology worm compliant. It is a federal government kind of standard. The reason that not everybody has it is because not everybody needs to target federal government customers, but if they do, and if they have had it audited, and the provider that we use for S3, which is a technology called Cloudian, you can look at the capabilities of their arrays on the internet. They do actually have a worm certification for these arrays, and it is something that is pretty much, I would say, the only real credible way to ensure that your data is not going to be compromised by ransomware these days. Let's see. Somebody asked a little bit about the cost of VMware DRaaS for securing your DR infrastructure. Sure. So at a very high level, we got time? Yeah, plenty of time. So at the highest levels, when you look at the basic cost effectiveness of just data storage itself, right? If you were to go out and buy 30 terabyte array, your cost per terabyte for that array is going to be way higher than if you built an array that was even 500 terabytes or 600 terabytes from an array perspective. And that's both a buying power thing, but also just a, for the technical people on this call, there's a, the controllers themselves have a cost and the storage itself has a cost, and there's kind of, you can blend those two things together. And anytime you have smaller arrays, the cost per terabyte is higher, right? So that's one capability. And then you get into volume buying, reasons. And then ultimately you get into even more complex differences like data compression and deduplication and global deduplication and things like that, where if you start sharing infrastructure with other people, the provider recognizes a lot of cost effectiveness from that, and passes that on, or should be passing it on to the consumer, the people on the call. I will say that disaster recovery as a service in the most technical implementation. So when you guys call up SunGuard or somebody like that, and you have this really complex DR conversation with them, and they map out everything for you, and they plan everything, and they do, like, that is a very bespoke solution for and can be very costly. But if you're looking to consume what I call technical DR, where you are leveraging it like you would a cloud service, like a Amazon or a Google or whatever, or even our infrastructure service products, a design point click, that type of consumption model, where we're not doing your application mappings and doing all these things. When we're providing services like that, and our competitors are as well, that is a very mature market today. So you can actually have a lot of trust that the costs have been optimized, right? And are consistently being optimized. Then you start getting into, the compute side of it, software side of it, which is underestimated by a lot of people. How much software licensing do you need in a DR location? Because not every software provider is, the best at making it easy for you to consume a second site DR. And then the data center itself, just space, power, etc. The cost effectiveness of the provider that's delivering that to you versus what you would pay to get rack infrastructure in a somewhat retail way. Let's say, call it sub 20, 30, even 100 racks, right? There's going to be a lot of differences there, and all that boils down to, even before you get to all of the maintenance that still goes into maintaining in this case, VMware deployment, we still have to go through and upgrade and patch and hardware lifecycle and all that, those components. And then the last one I would say is like the cost of creating your own DR infrastructure. A lot of times it's a CapEx, OpEx thing, right? Like, the idea for your CFO of spending money on 2 copies of everything is really hard to get over for a lot of people. So kind of leave it with that. If anybody has any more questions, now's the time to throw them in. I really want to thank everybody for a lot of very productive questions. I know that this is a hard kind of thing to address. It's still difficult sometimes to convince the right people in the business that this is necessary. If you need help with that, you know, myself and my teams, we're here to help kind of talk through the stakeholders, you know, the value proposition, the business value proposition of disaster recovery, offsite backup, data protection in general, and secure cloud computing. And I think that that's all those segments are core to pNAP. They're core to our message of building secure infrastructure as a service. And with that, I thank everybody for joining, and I'm going to toss it back to Drew for some housekeeping items.
Great, and thank you, William, for taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you everyone for submitting the questions and joining us. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast. To find out more about the VMUG Webcast program, visit vmug.com and check out the education page. Please make sure to complete the short online evaluation that will pop up as you exit the webcast, and let us know how today's session went. And from all of us here at VMUG, thank you and have a great rest of your day.